I will start with an update on our next release. So our next major release should be going into testing very soon. All the requests are complete. This is the list of the requests that were per client to go into this release. Last thing we have is an interpretation module for Kansas that I'm testing.
Are you sharing your screen?
We will, oh, no, but let me do that. Sorry, thank you. So we will finish the testing. In this will include a new very large Java upgrade, which Joe is going to speak to in a later session. So the testing for that will be extensive also. And just last week, got notice from Wisconsin that at NatMech, Stephen was asking people for submitting individual vehicle records to TMAS. And so I created a JIRA for that. And so what we're going to do is include the individual vehicle record exports that TMAS accepts, not WIM. Obviously, WIM has always been individuals, but now there are, starting in the TMG 2016, a variety of exports that include individual vehicles. One of the questions I have, but I haven't had an answer back from FHWA yet, is it the 2016 version of TMG that when he said they're accepting it now in TMAS, is that the correct version? Does anyone in this group know?
I thought the most current version of TMAS was up to 2016. I thought they finally incorporated all that stuff, but I could be wrong.
Well, I thought there was a 2019 version.
There's a 2022 version.
Yes. Okay. I don't know why I thought there was a 2019 version. So clearly it would be 2016. So that's in Jeff's court, and as soon as that's done, then that would be the final big thing that I want to include in this one. So what I'll do, as always, is reach out to each individual client to organize the installation of the next release. And please remember, when you get that, then means we're going to be starting immediately on working on, new items for the next release. So send me your requested item if you have one. Something that has been around for a little while, but now we've incorporated using short-term sites. I see Drew's being funny. Can I request a JIRA to change my background? No. You can create the JIRA. We'll see when Jeff gets around to it. So we use length to create class factors if a state chooses so. And so I just wanted to bring up that it's a setting. In your internal settings, use length to create factors, true or false. And when you run your phase 2 to calculate axle factors, if you have this set to true, we will use continuous length to do the calculations. We do use a hierarchy. And if it's an individual vehicle record site, or you've got both class and length at the site, we use the class axle class first and the length classification only if the axle class doesn't exist. So just to know that it is in that order. And then in order to use the length to calculate those, in your various binning schemes. For your length data, you must have the number of axles set up correctly so that we know how to make the calculations for those factors. So if you, this is what's new, want to use short-term length or class data to help bolster your calculation phase 2 factors, we have a report, AC10, and it will give you a list of all short-term class and length sites for the given year that have data, so that you would know maybe what sites you wanted to manually add to your screen. So I've created the report. Here's the report. It shows you your sites and the dates of your data and what type of data are included for that count. We don't automatically use short-term in phase 2. This is required, this would require you to add your sites manually. So in that report, I found a site that belongs to group 1. Clearly this group 1 has plenty of sites in it, but let's say it was a really light site and we wanted to use some of the short-term data. We can add the site to the group. And Laura, if you would tell me if you see any chat, because I don't have that up on my window anymore, so I don't have confusion. Okay. So let's see, 716. Oh, so I added the site to the group. I need to hit refresh so that that site will appear in my list of sites. Here it is. I'm going to snip this picture here. So we see what our factors were up top. We'll run it with adding this short-term site, and then we'll see some change in what the factors are. So now I've added the site to the group. I can go into, let me select it, generate factors. I'm generating the factors for this site, and this process calculates the factor for the site in question, and then just part of that process includes the group average gets recalculated when a site changes. So I'm going to hit the generate factors. I'll hit my job submitted. We should see that there is an axle factor job running. It's already done. So now when we come back to our factor window and refresh, our 716101 should have factors. And it does. And our group factors should have changed, maybe, if it's enough to have changed it up above. Not really. So not enough to have changed our group factors. And then you can continue to now add another site and recalculate, or you can add multiple sites all at once and then recalculate your whole group, and you don't have to do it one at a time, just based on how much you're planning on doing. Any questions on using short-term sites to calculate axle factors? Something that Kentucky had requested last year was a way to provide short-term data to clients or export short-term data in kind of a fixed format. So we have a CSV export now for short-term class or volume data. And that's done in your export area, and you will see that there is a short-term CSV as an option now. You can select your short-term export. You can select class or volume. I've already put in a small date range where I know that we have some. You hit your export button. And I don't know if Melissa might want to give the background of this request, but Melissa from Kentucky is the one who had asked for this. And I'm not sure who you provide this to, but apparently it saved you quite a bit of work being able to do the export versus whatever you were doing manually. Put her on the spot.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We get a lot of customers who want just multiple years worth of data by hour, and they want it all in the same format. So being able to give it to them in the same or similar fashion to the FHWA exports for volume is very helpful.
Okay, so here's what a class export looks like. It's by hour, by day, by direction, by class. And this is the site name there. Similarly then, volume. And again, you can do this by a specific site, or I'm doing all sites for that date range. You can kind of use all of the same little options that you get when you're doing exporting for TMAS also. It's based on just a format we put together. It's not a TMG format. And the importance or the difference in this versus the TMG stuff is, in order to export data for TMAS, your sites have to have an S record filled out so that the system knows what sites to include in the export. So clearly you aren't submitting this into TMAS, so we needed a separate export type. And volume looks like this. And the volume is the whole day by direction for all of your hours.
Catherine Christie asked, is the short-term export based on formatting from the TMG or from something else?
Right, it's just our format. It's not the TMG. I thought I must not have been clear.
But it uses TMG conventions. It's like direction code and lane numbers of the TMG.
Yeah, it's similar.
It's more Excel friendly.
Okay, another thing that's coming up in the version that you will be receiving is another request from a different client that didn't want to have data files resubmitted in some cases when you would do a file resubmit all in batches. I'm reading Nicholas's comments. So this looks helpful, putting into an Excel file for a data request. Yep, so now you know that that is there. It's in the version that you have now. However, in the upcoming version that we are putting out, we handle nulls versus zero data differently. So you might want to wait for the newest version in order to use it. Sometimes people go and do a resubmit all for a batch for any given reason. Maybe something changed in binding or any of the various reasons that you might do a resubmit all. But there might be a case where you don't want one of those files to run ever again. It's binding incorrectly, it's creating problems for you. In fact, Eric, who happens, I think, to be in this meeting, might have a little insight as to why this was helpful for him. But we now have a way to submit or to set a file never to get resubmitted. So in order to demonstrate this, I have purged the data that was associated with this file. When you open the file for viewing, there is now a lock file for no process. If you mark it for that and then did a resubmit all, you will see that it sets this file to a pink status, meaning it doesn't resubmit, even if you were to highlight any of these and hit resubmit. It does not go and resubmit the file for you. And as you see, we can hit refresh. It did not pick up the file and reprocess this file. Then again, if you decided in the future you do want to submit the file, you can click on the file and unlock the file for processing. Refresh and your pink status for this file will go away. You could resubmit it and your data would appear again. So again, at someone's request for helpful reasons why files being picked up sometimes weren't a good thing. Make sure I don't have any questions. Any questions on files being set unsubmit in the future? Something that came up after last year's users group was the request that users wanted to see a list of our outstanding JIRA list items. So I began compiling a list of open JIRAs and sending it out basically at the beginning of every month. So that looks like this. Those of you who are interested, peruse it and use it. And so what you'll find in there is I put the status inside of what each of the items are. Let me just see if I can find one that's not backlog. Like here's one that's in progress. There might be some that are, okay, so here's back when I did this last month, there were some in code review. And so we have various statuses that are in this JIRA list that Laura's going to cover and show you in a document that I also sent out last month. So last month I sent out some extra documentation and Laura is going to cover with you what that documentation was trying to tell you.
Was that your last thing? Or are we ready for me?
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
Unless anyone has a question, or they can hold questions till the end of your demonstration also.
Let me just show this quickly first before we go into that part. This was the, these were the release notes after everyone was given the 7 dot whatever version of Jackalope. And I know this becomes sort of a daunting 10-page document to look at. And certainly the vast majority of these JIRAs maybe don't even apply to each of you that would be looking at it. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the things. We would have maybe demonstrated a lot of the highlighted things last users group, saying in the upcoming major release, here's what kind of things you're going to see. But these are the sort of important things you might want to know or ask us more questions about after there's a major release. So things like we implemented lane-specific functionality for QC parameters. So we did a demo last time showing you if you're doing QC parameters and you want to add a site override, and then you even want to drill down specifically to the passing lane for consecutive hours of 0, for example, for a certain site. That is something you're able to do now. We also list various new reports that were created, and also keep those in this Dropbox folder that we've shared to everyone. Anyone who doesn't have access or is prevented from viewing a shared Dropbox folder, you can just ask me anytime. I'll send you whatever's in it that you might need. But in this Dropbox folder, we will also have a copy of the user guide with the date that it was most recently updated. We do regular updates to it, but don't push it out necessarily to everyone. So we always do a new user guide release whenever we do a major Jackalope version release, but also occasionally if we've added functionality that really needed documentation, we'll sort of incrementally add and rename the file with a date. Also our Jackalope sample reports, and the last time I added new reports to that was in February. So you should be able to find examples of the reports referenced in the release notes there too. So there's a few of the reports you can see I've highlighted. We did create a sort of we showed last time in last year's user group that the notes user interface is different. It really displays better what kinds of notes. Was it a count summary note that came from data that was QC flagged, or was it a note that you created because it was a holiday and you've created a purge note for a holiday, for example? So that was referenced there. Catherine's going to talk about this, I think, tomorrow. Virtual site ability to copy from site AADT. So maybe that is important to you, or maybe it isn't, but that would have been given to you in the last major release. So if that's interesting to you, you can focus on that. There was a future improvement request that was completed where the station record export could include all sites or just sites with data for this year. I will include a copy of this with everything that we give out for this year's user group. Again, this shared Dropbox folder had last year's folder in it, and then we'll also have a folder for this year that will have Mark's PowerPoint and things Joe does, and these things that I'm showing on my screen here will also be included in that. There also is, that was, I believe it might have even been initially a Missouri request, but that everybody agreed they wanted. And it took quite a long time to actually build and test and make sure it was functioning properly. QC checks, and I think all of you pretty much know this, but QC checks now can be done in the old way they were, where we would just give you the first instance of where a QC failed. So if positive lane 1 failed, we didn't check all the other lanes. Jackalope would just move on to the next QC check and just give you the one example of positive lane 1 failing. However, it was important in some cases for people to really see, is one lane giving this error? Is this a problem all across the roadway? So that is a function that you can now turn on and off. And now this is system-wide, so perhaps you just want to turn this feature on, run a file, turn the feature back off. But in internal settings, you would look for the parameter process after error, and if it's set to true, you're going to keep checking and show me every single example of where a QC failed. Positive 1, positive lane 2, negative lane 1, negative lane, etc. Or if you have it set to false, which is the old way Jackalope worked, which is how Tratus worked, which is how most of you have your internal setting right now, is just show me an example of the first time the QC fails and then move on to the next QC. I don't need to see 3,000 examples. I mean, that can obviously make a batch pretty extensive. One thing you could consider is if you run a batch of many files and you have maybe a QC flag showing up and you really want to just check and see if a site is being problematic, you could turn this internal setting onto true, just resubmit or submit a handful of that site's data, go turn it back to false, so everybody else doesn't have to see all of their QC checks repeatedly, and then just see what that file of yours or that set of files was doing. So that's maybe helpful in some cases. We also did create the notes report that can be generated in many different ways to just give you an idea of all the the sorts of no AADT notes, purge notes, that sort of thing that are in Jackalope for by site or by date or system-wide or a site group, etc. We did add the virtual site process to the job submitted screen. So if you're processing virtual sites, you will see in the job submitted screen that your job was created, it's running, and then it finished. So Catherine was just talking about short-term data to calculate factors. The report engine changed a little bit in that we now give you the option to retain site or date settings. Some people go in and want to create reports for the first week of February, and they're going to create class, volume, length, WIM reports, and it's all going to be for the first week of that month. And so they don't want to keep typing the date in when they switch between reports, or maybe they're just interested in looking at various reports for a certain subset of sites. And so those sort of check boxes are now functional in Jackalope for you. Catherine talked about exporting short-term site data in the export screen. We also had created, but then no one had been really using, and it became important to Wisconsin to make the roles feature functional for reports. So there were a few reports they wanted to restrict to very specific people, and I believe they were HPMS related reports. And they didn't want those available to the general public or to the average user until that data had been checked over and verified and then made more public. So it is possible now to set certain reports to only be visible to certain people. And I can, of course, help with that if anyone's interested. And in the interest of not droning on and on, you'll see there's more reports. So I will have a copy of this available in case you missed it last time it was sent out, or in case you wanted to see the sorts of things I was mentioning are good to hone in on. Any questions on that? Probably not. It's pretty simple. The next, oh, it looks like I closed all my PDFs. The next thing I wanted to show you was in, oh, that won't be it. Okay. Catherine had sent this out, and we'll include a copy in this 2022 user group folder. But we wanted to just explain to anybody that didn't know what a JIRA is, how we prioritize them, and that sort of thing. JIRAs, as you know, are our tasks, which can include bugs, improvements, new features, things like that. So this is a way that we keep track of jobs that we're working on, basically. All Jackalope clients pay the same amount in annual support and maintenance, and we try to do our best to allocate our resources fairly among all of our clients. And so we take a lot of things into consideration. How important is a JIRA to a client as defined by them? Are other clients affected by this? So if Missouri asks for something, is it actually important to everybody and not just to Missouri, for example? By addressing this JIRA, are we distributing our resources fairly among all other clients in the short term? And then are we also distributing our resources fairly in the long term? We understand that we might work for a given client in bursts and maybe might do 3 things for Missouri all at once that are important to them, important to everybody, good for the whole group. But then maybe we don't work on anything for Missouri for 6 months after that because everything's kind of been taken care of for them and they're running along smoothly. So it isn't necessarily important or advantageous for us to work on a Missouri, a Minnesota, a Utah, JIRA all at the same time. Perhaps Missouri needs 2 things worked on and Utah doesn't need anything until next month. So I know that seems obvious, but we just wanted to mention it, that we do our best to try and allocate our time fairly considering that some client may get a little bit more of our time than another, but we do hope that it evens out in the long run. We absolutely want you to be as happy with Jackalope as you can be. Our satisfaction being a co-op and being as dedicated as we are, and all of us working with each other and with you for so long, it really does matter to us and offers us peace of mind to know that we can take care of things for you, make your job a little bit easier, and we know that you appreciate that, and that is our goal, truly. And I think those of you that have worked with us for years know that to be true from us. Another important point, though, is that we don't ever leave a client out in the cold if there's an emergency. We will all drop what we're working on if there is a major outage or some sort of a server upgrade that caused Jackalope to completely stop functioning. And so whether it takes one of us or three of us, whatever we were working on, we drop to be able to handle emergencies immediately. And again, we hope that evens out over time and we can give each of you the emergency care that you need also. Another thing we consider is how we categorize emerging issues. Are they bugs in that something that should have been working or has been working suddenly isn't working? Or are they something like a future change or maybe a future enhancement? And sometimes it's difficult to determine exactly what that is, and maybe something that was a future change evolves into a bug or a defect. So here's how we basically try to prioritize. Number one, if it's a bug, if it's not, if it's something that's preventing us from, or excuse me, you from completing work you need to do right now. Second priority will be a bug that prevents you from doing work soon. Maybe you have a project you need to get done next week. It's not today's emergency, but it's next week's emergency. And so, you know, that's obviously emergency, but one step lower. And number three is a project that we take on that uses some sort of direct database connection, something like queries that we need to work on, but doesn't require deployments. And as all of you know, deployments can take a bit of time to do a version and testing, and then create a production branch and test that to make sure that the production branch is functioning properly, and then get that to you. So we often sprinkle in projects that we're doing that don't interact with deployments to get those done, you know, kind of simultaneously with other things. Number four would be a bug, but that there's a workaround for, or isn't really preventing any work that you're doing, but it is a bug and nobody likes bugs. And so we add that in maybe in about a space number four. Usually we have some warning that there's going to be a change related to federal or local requirements, or an upcoming equipment purchase on your end, or changes in the equipment that's coming. It's not a huge emergency because we have a timeline that we know it's in the future, but that needs to be prioritized and kind of worked in as it comes up to the top of the list. 6, 7, and 8, I have a little asterisk if you can see here. We try to prioritize 6, 7, and 8 in an equitable manner so that we can address each thing for each client and not spend too much time serving one client and not to another. So we try to send out a survey regularly and ask you what's something that you'd like us to work on that's a priority for you, but that maybe nobody else really cares about, but it's important to you and we want to help you with what you need. So these are client suggested improvements that everyone can benefit from. Client suggested but not really required out of the box sort of items that isn't necessarily needed or wanted by other clients. So this might be this is an only you thing, but it's important to you. And then number 8 would be maybe the least important in a day-to-day prioritization process. And that's a bug that has a really reasonable workaround. It's not preventing you from getting your job done. Maybe it takes a few extra mouse clicks, but you know, could use some, when we have a little bit of time in the future, it'd be important to fix it, but it really isn't preventing anything from being done because it has a workaround and isn't really causing you huge stress day to day. So that's a number 8. Any questions about that? And let me open my last one. This you probably also saw, which Catherine sent out. which just kind of gives you, because she's sending out the JIRA list once a month, you may see some of these definitions, backlog, to do, ready, that sort of thing. We use something called Kanban, which is a board for sort of maintaining our workflow of JIRAs. So it actually kind of looks like a nicely interactive spreadsheet that shows what things are in the queue, who's working on what, who's tested what, and which things have been closed or sent back. And so here's just a few definitions. I won't read them all, but obviously backlog is just something we've created but isn't in anybody's queue at this time. To do means it's in, the upcoming status. We're ready for it to be on the board, and so that it's moved up from backlog to do. Ready means we've reviewed it, we've talked about it, it's in the active queue, and it's ready to be picked up by one of our developers. When a developer gets it, it'll go to development in progress and then development done when they're finished with it. This can be any number of days or even longer, depending on how complicated the process is. So between development, progress, and done. When it's done, then code review is done on it, just sort of as an initial check to see if all looks sane before we go into the testing process. So it's reviewed, and then we say the code review's done. If we see any sort of issues with it, we send it back to the programmer. So that would be code review fail, but I don't expect any of you would actually see that. That's a pretty short process here. And then once Catherine and I have a version that includes this bit of code, we start testing it. So we'll do testing in progress and then closed. Sometimes a testing could go into fail, but then if something fails, it comes back to the development in progress process and sort of starts again here. Just because something is closed does not mean that you all have it yet. It's been tested, closed, and it is ready to be grafted into a major release or a production branch, depending on what the urgency is of it. And then it just kind of gives you a picture here that indicates sort of the process and how we go through here. So any questions on that? Just as my last point then about the shared Dropbox folder we were talking about, let me go back to it. Oops, wrong one. So this is the folder that you all should or hopefully can have access to, and if not, you can ask me for things that are in it. Again, we talked about the user guide. We do plan on having minor updates to the user guide every time we do a major release to you all, so that we can document in the user guide things that we have demoed in a maybe in our user group, for example, so that you actually have a written documentation of that. And then that will be found here. If you ever download and save this to your local machine, you could always access this folder again and see what the date is of our current user guide. We'll always replace an existing user guide with an updated user guide with a new date on it. So that's going to be the way you can tell if you have an old version or not. And that's where the user guide lives for
We
now.
also send out the user guide when we do the major releases. I always send a copy of the PDF with my notice that we are ready to install the new version.
We also take, or I do this occasionally, if anybody said, oh, your user guide's kind of vague on such and such a section, I don't understand what you meant by, and then, while we reply to the email about what we meant by that, I'll go into the user guide and try to explain a little bit better. And so I do try to catch those sorts of things so that we are continuously improving on the user guide. We do also have, as you all know by now, the YouTube channel, which has demos. It will have all of our sessions recorded here, uploaded to a playlist that's the 2022 user group playlist, and I have all of those there as well. So sometimes that's good, especially if you have a new user coming in that you've just hired, and you want to give them a few training videos. There are some decent training videos that are in there available to all of you at any time. So that's it for me. So let's see if
Thanks
there's
for covering
anyone
that,
else.
Laura. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't know
Laura,
if anyone
the
really
reason I missed
paid
it.
attention to the document, so.
Well, is that a publicly shared Dropbox folder? Is that
It is.
accessible? Okay.
I know some states or clients may be blocked from accessing the Dropbox folder in that way. So that's why we say we'll send out the user guide. Catherine said, send out the user guide when we have a major release, or you're welcome to ask me for anything at any time, a quick email, and I'm happy to send it to you. That was just the best that worked for the most people. So that's what we're going with for now.
Okay.
So if there are no more questions, we're 3 minutes now early for lunch. So
That sounds good, Laura. So we should just go ahead and break now and then resume at the turning movement demo. Is that right?
yes, turning
Mhm.
movement demo at 1:15, so that's 11:15 Pacific. 1 hour and 3 minutes from now.
Okay. Thanks, Laura.
Have a good lunch,
Thanks.
everyone.